It's great to see a full room here at 8:30 a.m. on the day 3. So wonderful that so many people are here to hear about the gender gap. It's a really important issue, so we're delighted to have you all in the room. My name is Thorpe. I'm head of the Connected Women and Connected Society programs at Gsma. And so we know that mobile can really transform women's lives. We know that it has huge impact in terms of the commercial return for operators, economic impact, can support the delivery of the SDGs. So this is a really important issue. We also know there's a gender gap. So we're here to talk about that, and we're here to not only understand the issue, but also understand, have a look at what we can do to address it, because we all need to take action. We're going to start by sharing about our latest data on the mobile gender gap. Because if you don't really understand the size of the problem or know the barriers that women face, it's not possible to address it. And we can't look at what progress we're making. And for the first time, we're super excited. For the first time, we've been able to look at whether the gender gap is closing or not, because we have sufficient data to start to look at that. So we're excited to share. I won't say the answer. We'll hold that for the presentation. But what we do know is that the gender gap isn't going to close on its own. It needs measurable, targeted action by stakeholders. So we are really also delighted to share that at Mobile World Congress in 2016, mobile operators stood on stage and made commitments to closing the gender gap in their customer base with specific targets for 2020. And we are now, since 2016, we now have 37 operators who've made 52 commitments, who've reached over 16 million new women with either mobile internet or mobile money services. This is impressive. Yeah. So we know that it can make a difference. And what's also more impressive, when not only the numbers, but when you look at those operators who've made commitments, they have successfully reduced their gender gap. So we know that targeted action can make a difference, and if you take it, the gender gap will reduce. And there's evidence, and we have a number of our partners who've done this, coming on stage to talk to you later about what they've done, but they have succeeded. They are reaching millions, and they are reducing their gender gap. But we know that it needs to be not just the mobile industry. It's not just mobile operators that work to address this problem. So without wanting to sort of steal the thunder of what's going to come later in terms of our report, we need action. We need more action by more stakeholders. And so in this regard, we're also delighted to be one of the co-founders of Equals, which is the global partnership on the digital gender divide, which is a multi-stakeholder partnership with more than 100 partners now trying to work on this issue. And they're working on we have, there's coalitions on skills, access, and leadership in a research group. So we're also delighted that we have 2 of the other co-founders here with us today to talk about what other stakeholders and what they're doing. So Julie from Head of UN Women and Doreen from ITU. So we're also delighted that you're here to talk about what you're doing. So the purpose of this session is really to talk about the problem, to look at the issue and look at what we can do and see the practical actions. And without more ado, I would like to welcome Oliver Roundtree to the stage, who is the lead author of our new report, to share the findings of what the data is saying at the moment before we talk about solutions.
Thanks, Claire. And thanks, everybody, for being here so early in the morning. So my name is Oliver Roundtree. I'm Senior Insights Manager in the Connected Women team. And as Claire mentions, I'm the author of the Mobile Gender Gap Report 2019. And I'm delighted to be able to present to you the results of the report today. So this is the second year in a row where we have published a Mobile Gender Gap Report. So we're very excited that this allows us to start making some year-on-year comparisons on how the mobile gender gap is changing. This also follows a 2015 report that we published on the same topic. So we had 4 main objectives when we went into researching the mobile gender gap this year. We wanted to be able to, again, size the gender gap in mobile ownership and mobile internet use, and for the first time be able to comment on how that is changing over time. We wanted to be able to look beyond just ownership and access to how does actually the usage of mobile differ between men and women. And then we wanted to be able to look at what is preventing ownership, access, and usage for both men and women, and what are the key things that need to be addressed by stakeholders to close the gender gap. And then finally, we wanted to be able to look at both the economic and the commercial opportunity from closing the gender gap. So why should stakeholders really take action on this? So as well as our own research, we looked to a range of different sources, including drawing from important ITU studies on the topic. So the data that we'll be talking through comes from the Gsma Intelligence Consumer Survey 2018. This is a large-scale survey that covers 18 low and middle-income countries. So we speak to over 20,000 respondents with face-to-face interviews, which is representative of 69% of the population of low and middle-income countries. And where we don't cover countries, we build an extrapolation model to be able to estimate the values in those countries. So what did we find through this research? I think one of the most impactful stats for me was that today, 80% of women in low and middle income countries own a mobile phone. I think that's an incredible number, and really in many ways an incredible achievement. In many of the poorest countries in the world, this technology is still reaching millions and millions of people, and millions more people than it was reaching even just 5 years ago. But that raises an important question. Do we still need to be talking about the mobile gender gap, or is the job done? I definitely don't think the job is done. There's still important work that needs to be done. And there's two main reasons why that's the case. And I'm going to go into detail on those for the rest of this presentation. But on a high level, the two factors are, firstly, 80% is an incredible figure, but it masks important regional inequalities. I think it's fair to say that the women who potentially stand to benefit the most from mobile ownership and use are still the furthest away from having access. And then more than that, mobile isn't just about ownership. It's about enabling access to a huge range of empowering and life-enhancing services. And when we look further along that user journey, the gender gap widens at each stage. So perhaps now we need to be focusing our attention further along that user journey. It's an incredible stat that amongst women in lower middle income countries who use the internet, 61% of them only ever do so on a mobile phone. And in Bangladesh, for example, that stat is as high as 89%. So mobile is an incredibly powerful enabler of digital inclusion. So to look a little bit deeper into the mobile ownership gender gap, 80% of women now own a mobile phone across low middle income countries, but that still means that over 400 million women are unconnected in low middle income countries today. And the gender gap has remained constant at 10% year on year. And it's also important to highlight that while in some regions there's a fair amount of gender parity in terms of ownership of mobile, in other regions there's a huge amount of inequality in ownership. In particular, in sub-Saharan Africa and in South Asia, they have the largest mobile ownership gender gaps in the world. In sub-Saharan Africa, women are 15% less likely than men to own a mobile phone, and in South Asia, 28%. And in some countries, this widens even significantly further. For example, in Mozambique, we found that women were 24% less likely than men to own mobile, and in Pakistan, 37%. Looking even beyond just the national level, in urban areas, typically the gap is smaller, and in rural areas, the gap much wider. In India, for example, a gender gap is found at 40% in urban areas and 61% in rural areas. So even where we may not see a gender gap on the highest level, there are still important gaps that need to be addressed at the lower level as well. So looking onto my second reason why this is still a critical issue. Mobile ownership is just the first critical step towards wider digital inclusion through a mobile phone. And we look at it on this high-level user journey towards what is the most important objective, which is being able to use a diverse and empowering range of mobile internet services. This is really critical to the digital inclusion and social and economic inclusion of women in the future. So we need to consider the gender gap at each stage of this user journey to be able to fully understand what is the scale and importance of the mobile gender gap still. So let's move further along that journey and look at what happens at each stage. So at the second point, we find that although we might assume that even in developing countries, that everybody is aware of mobile internet, everybody is aware of Facebook, everybody is aware of WhatsApp, but the stats tell us that is not true. In the countries with the lowest levels of mobile internet penetration, many people still aren't aware of the internet and of the fact that it can be used on a mobile phone. And that tends to be significantly lower for women. In India, for example, only 42% of women are aware of mobile internet versus 59% of men. So still a minority of women being aware. It is worth flagging, though, that that is a growth year on year. So awareness is growing potentially fairly quickly. We saw only 19% of women in India were aware of mobile internet last year. And so both the ownership gap and this awareness gap contribute to an even wider gender gap in mobile internet use. So women in lower middle income countries are still 23% less likely than men to use mobile internet. And that translates to 1.1 billion women across lower middle income countries who still don't use. And the gender gap is wider in every region that we looked at than in mobile ownership. And again, that gap widens further in certain regions. Again, the gap is widest in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, where it's 58%. And in Pakistan, only 11% of women use mobile internet, compared to 38% of men. It's also interesting to note that actually, year on year, we did see potentially a reduction in the mobile internet gap. We found a gap across lower middle income countries of 26% last year. So we're seeing a little more progress on this potentially, although it's too soon to say from the data whether this gap will reduce entirely. We saw a lot of that closure coming from India, where changing market dynamics have led to greater affordability of data and easier access for women. So again, looking beyond just access, when we look at usage, even once women and men own a mobile phone, a gap emerges in how they use those phones. So again, looking at the case of India, if we look at the perhaps more basic or simple use case of making or receiving calls, we see relative gender parity, looking at the teal bar on top representing men versus the red bar on the bottom representing women. Both 83% of men and women made phone calls on their mobile phones. But as we look further along the user journey towards more sophisticated, potentially transformative, internet-based use cases, that gap widens further. And when we look at, for example, downloading and using apps, only 14% of female mobile owners did so, compared to 32% of men. And this usage gap manifests in a gender gap in spending on mobile, which is indicative of an even wider gap in the intensity of usage of these services. So across lower middle income countries, female mobile owners spend 17% less on their mobile phones than men. And the interesting thing is that gap exists even in countries where there is no gender gap in ownership or in mobile internet use, which indicates that even those women who do own and use mobile phones are using them less intensely for a less diverse and useful range of services, even in the most developed countries. So why is this gender gap persisting? Why does it exist in the first place, and why is it not closing? It's a difficult question to answer. There's two broad themes that underpin the barriers to mobile ownership and mobile internet use and lead to them disproportionately impacting on women. We would categorize this into two themes. Demographic barriers, firstly. So looking at women across low middle income countries, I don't think anybody will be surprised to find that they tend to make up a disproportionate proportion of more marginalized demographic groups. Women are almost twice as likely as men to be illiterate in low middle income countries and less than half as likely to participate in the labor force. So these factors are both ones that are strongly correlated with being able to access, own, and use a mobile phone. So these factors compound and accentuate the barriers that women feel to ownership and use of a mobile. But also, there are more specific social norms which affect and influence women specifically in lower middle income countries in many of the markets that we look at. These can limit women's mobility and financial autonomy, but ability to make decisions about their own purchases, such as owning a mobile phone. But it can also make gatekeepers feel that mobile ownership is inappropriate for women and potentially a distraction from what they should be doing. So both of these factors contribute to that gender gap, and they're not going away anytime soon. So we need to find ways to mitigate these effects. Now, we, as well as looking into these factors, we asked a large range of questions about the specific barriers that both men and women felt to mobile ownership and use. We asked 13 barriers for mobile ownership and 18 for mobile internet use. We grouped these into similar themes, and then we ranked across all low middle income countries what emerged as the most important barriers. And we found some interesting things. So we found similar themes from ownership and internet use, but with important differences. For ownership, it may not be surprising to find that the number one barrier for both men and women owning a mobile phone was the affordability of handsets. We might think that that challenge has been addressed, but it absolutely has not. For those people who still don't own, even the lowest cost handsets can still be a prohibitive expense to be able to own a mobile. When we looked at mobile internet, it was really interesting to find that, in fact, literacy and digital skills came above affordability as the top barrier in many of the markets that we looked at. So this manifests both because of lower levels of literacy in many countries, and as we've seen on the previous slide, this is a factor that tends to disproportionately affect women. But it's also a lack of confidence with digital skills. And again, for women, this often manifests as less confidence in independently acquiring digital skills and the ability to use a mobile. We also found that in many countries, relevance was a key topic both for mobile ownership and mobile internet, a lack of understanding of how a mobile can be relevant in their lives and how the internet can actually help them on a day-to-day basis, a lack of understanding of the content that they could access and the services that they could make use of. Safety and security issues are a very important one in many markets that we look at, and many of our partners are taking important actions to make sure that women feel safer on their mobiles and safer online. This is particularly an issue that we found emerging in Latin America, where it was often the number one barrier in many countries that we looked at. So we've looked at the problem, but it's also fair to say that closing the mobile gender gap represents an incredible opportunity, both for the industry and for society at large. When we dug into the data and extrapolated a model for what the impact of closing the gender gap would be, we found that over 5 years, if the mobile industry in lower middle income countries could close the gender gap in mobile ownership and mobile usage, this could present a $140 billion commercial opportunity. So there is a real commercial incentive for the industry to take action. But beyond that, also, if we could close the gender gap in mobile internet use in lower middle income countries, over 5 years, this could drive an additional $700 billion of GDP growth. And that represents an additional 0.7% of GDP growth over those 5 years. So it should be a high priority, both for the industry, for governments, for international organizations. The internet is going to be an incredibly important driver of economic growth in the future. And if we don't equalize access for both men and women, potentially women are going to have their marginalized position economically both reinforced and worsened over time. This 700 billion figure drew from a study from the ITU on the economic effects of closing the gender gap, of increasing internet penetration. So looking beyond this data, it's also true that closing the mobile gender gap can benefit women as individuals, empower them and make sure that they're digitally included. It can bring benefits to society more broadly, but also critically, it can contribute towards the achievement of the UN SDGs. Of course, SDG 5, but also a range of others. Gender equality underpins many of the SDGs, and so taking action to close the gender gap is really critical here. So I've run through a lot of figures and facts. There's a few key takeaways that I want you to leave the room with today. First is that Now, 80% of women in lower middle income countries own a mobile phone. But there is still a gender gap. Women are 10% less likely than men to own a mobile phone, and this gender gap is not reducing. Furthermore, women are 23% less likely than men to use mobile internet in lower middle income countries. And this gender gap extends beyond just ownership and access, but to usage. Looking further down that user journey, the gap widens at each stage, and this manifests further in a gender gap in mobile spending. The widest gender gaps both in ownership and mobile internet use are found in sub-Saharan Africa and in South Asia. Affordability is the #1 barrier for mobile ownership, particularly affordability of handsets. And literacy and digital skills are the top barriers to mobile internet use across low and middle income countries. Now, having talked through these problems, we have presented some recommendations to stakeholders, and please do take a look at the Mobile Gender Gap report. Some of you may find bags on the back of your chairs where you'll find a copy of the report, and here we have a full set of 29 recommendations to stakeholders. But we believe that there's a few actions that all stakeholders should take. First is to understand and address women's needs and barriers in your market and consider the effects of social norms and how to mitigate these in terms of women's digital inclusion. The second is to involve women in the design and implementation of products, services, and policies. Make sure these are tested with female end users. The third, and this is a critical one, improve the quality and availability of gender data, and then set targets on this data and track your progress against them. That's the only way that we can know what works and we can know whether we're having success. We have also pulled out stakeholder-specific recommendations that align to the 5 barrier themes that we identify as most important in lower middle-income countries. Here I just have a few examples, but please don't think that this is an exhaustive list. So, affordability, we found this to be an absolutely critical barrier. And so one example of an action that stakeholders can take is to support the industry in working to lower the cost of handsets at the point of purchase. This is going to significantly widen access for women, both to mobiles and to mobile internet. When we look at literacy and digital skills, there's a lot of action that needs to be taken there, but making sure that stakeholders are running digital skills training for new users is one critical way of being able to better onboard new users. When we look at safety and security, again, many actions need to be taken here, but I think one in particular is that internet services need to be created which make women feel safer online and more secure online and have more control of their digital presence. When we look at relevance, this is a huge barrier, particularly for mobile internet. And so many stakeholders need to find ways to better communicate how mobile internet and mobile ownership can be relevant for women's day-to-day lives, how they can make them more empowered and better able to access important services. And finally, accessibility. So one key example I can give here is that many stakeholders need to make sure that services are provided in local languages rather than just English or international languages. This is an issue that particularly impacts upon women and makes uptake and use of internet-based services a challenge. Again, this is not by any means an exhaustive list, but please do look at the full set of recommendations. So thank you very much for your time and attention. We may have time for a few questions now. We have a mic roving around here, so please raise your hand if you have a question and we should be able to get to you.
Thank you, Ollie. It's great. Great presentation. We did want to give a chance for a couple questions, so maybe I'll take 3 and then...
Hi there. Okay, thanks. Hopefully a very quick question, but wonderful. I'm from the United Nations Population Fund, and we focus a lot on women, so just thank you again for undertaking this research and bringing this important information to light. Just a quick question. Did you see any difference in age, or did you look at demographics? Because I mean, we would obviously hope that young women would perhaps have now better digital and literacy skills, maybe more access to mobile phones. So are we seeing, that gender gap that's not changing? Is that older women or women sort of above sort of 30, 40 who, we're going to have to try and re-educate now, which is obviously a bit of a harder task than investing in young people and young women.
Yeah, we did take a look at the demographics, and I think it's fair to say that this can vary a lot by country. So there's no kind of one answer that covers all markets. In general, ownership tends to be lower in older age brackets, but there does remain a gender gap in many markets amongst younger age categories. The job is not necessarily done, and often it can be very much grounded in social norms at the point of whether at the point of marriage it becomes less appropriate to be spending time using a mobile phone. There's important kind of inflection points in a woman's life where their relationship with mobile can really change quite fundamentally. I don't think we can necessarily assume that for the younger generation the job is done. There's still a lot to be done there.
Morning. Thank you so much for the report. It's very similar to one done in 2015 by the World Wide Web. And out of the recommendations, I've seen there's a lot of similarities. However, I think the thing that stands out in your report that I think needs more attention when it comes to some of the solutions you've provided is the issue of collaboration between different stakeholders, where I think government has a role to play. The reason being, sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Fiona, I'm from Kenya. And in my country, when I look at my country and the women in my country, you find even women in leadership are not as outgoing as women in other parts of the world. And this is the same right across Africa. It's a social thing that is very difficult to change. However, if stakeholders pay attention to, for example, women leaders, when we see our women leaders using the internet and mobile devices and the laptops differently, then we are encouraged to also do the same. Then we have someone you look up to. Unfortunately, a lot of them, we've had a discussion last year, and a lot of them say they don't use the internet as often because of issues of how women are handled when they communicate their views and opinions online. There's a lot of inappropriate, say, communication. You're attacked, basically. And then women in my part of the world tend to keep their lives private. So then when you're attacked and your whole private life sort of goes online, it becomes extremely intimidating. And we try to avoid being intimidated. So the way I see there being a change, because, for example, in Kenya, our government is offering a lot of services over the mobile platforms. The e-government is now available on the phone. You go to the rural areas, and people are getting phones that can enable them to register for their passports and things like that, because you can now do them physically. So there's a drive by government, but there needs to be also a push in terms of manufacturing and seeing the mobile manufacturers, can they design phones that work for us? Because they don't.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think the internet is not an equal place even once you are online for men and women. And so I think making it a more hospitable environment is absolutely an incredibly important task, both for the industry, for governments, and for other stakeholders. So 100% agree.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. People keep their comments brief, and then then I think we'll run out of time. But Ollie will be around afterwards to answer more questions.
Hi, Kristen Rogeman from DAI. My question is around the safety and security piece. Does that mean physical safety and security, like getting attacked because you have your phone on your person? Or some of the issues around like trust that we're seeing being raised at Congress around like user data, things like that?
Yeah, great question. We include, it includes both themes. It's a fairly high level category. If you flick to the back of the report, you'll be able to see the exact breakdown of that by different theme, whether that's kind of information security, physical safety. Both of these are key issues that emerge often in similar countries, but in Latin America we saw physical safety related to mobile emerge as a particular issue. But yeah, absolutely, both safety online and physical security emerge as key topics.
Yes, thank you, Manusha Rahman. I was just wondering if there is a recommendation in your report as to how a call for action could be raised towards the governments to allocate funding to bridge the gaps. Because certainly literacy and digital skills would require funding from either the public or the private sector. So is there a plan for the UN Women or GSMA to call on the governments to start allocating funding, or perhaps GSMA could demand that the USF funding could be allocated like we did in Pakistan to develop digital skills and started a few programs using the USF funding. So is there any such consideration? Because without funding, this won't happen.
Sure. So it's not something that we specifically address in the report, and of course the exact way that policymakers and governments should be approached is a nuanced issue on a country by country basis. I think communicating that it is not just an industry issue, but a wider economic and social issue, I think is a critical one that we've tried to emphasize this year in our research. You know, that this is a bedrock of further economic growth, and if governments don't take action on that, then potentially they're compromising what could be one of the crucial drivers of economic growth over the next few years. You know, women make up the vast majority of non-users of internet in many lower middle income countries. So how can we achieve the potential of the digital age if half the population is being left behind? I think that's the message that we need to be taking to governments to spur action. So I think I'm out of time. Thank you so much for the fantastic questions, and please do find me after if you have any further ones. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali. I love data, because without data we can't possibly understand or address this issue. So I'm so delighted that we're able to do this every year. And I also want to thank our donors, Swedish CEDU in the room, and the UK Department for International Development, who allow us to do this research. So thank you so much. This is really important. And now I would have the great honor to welcome Mats Granner, Director General of the GSMA, and Mpusile Mlabakaba, from Executive Director of UN Women, who are going to give us their reflections on what they think this means and what we can do. So thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. How are we doing? Well, I'm sitting here with a true rock star. I am just so honored to have Mpusile here. You know, she has had a very long and successful career in politics. And then the last 8 years or so, you are heading up UN Women, right? With the I'll dive right into it. You have this phenomenal title, and I need to read here. You are the Executive Director of the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and Empowerment of Women. So what does that mean? What do you do, actually? What do you do in real life? Yeah.
Our agency is the agency in the United Nations that is responsible for advancing gender equality. Of course, working together with the other sister agencies within the UN and beyond. Core to our work is facilitating the changes of laws and policies that governments adopt and pass to advance gender equality, and ensuring that we remove discriminatory laws. There's like 150 countries in the world that have got one or more law regulation that discriminate against women. From laws that say marry your rapist in order for the crime to go away, to the laws that deny women access, use, and ownership of land. So at any given point, there's about 70 countries in the world where my team is actively trying to change the laws. That is quite core to our work, including laws that have to do with access and use of the digital infrastructure, which is why I'm here.
Yeah.
We are very much interested in constantly encouraging governments and countries to do that. And with information like what we've received today, zooming on to the information that we now have about why this is good for women.
So what were your reflections when you heard Oliver describe the report? Is this sort of plain vanilla, you already know this, or is this something that is intriguing to you? What's your conclusion, basically, from the report?
Well, certainly it's good to have evidence. It makes us to be a bit more articulate when we speak to partners, but I also think that it gives us, you and me now, job description of the things that we need to do. We don't have to look in the dark. It's very clear. Let's do something in Southeast Asia. Let's do something in Sub-Saharan Africa. And these are some of the entry points that are critical for us to leverage and to get the results.
It's sort of that saying that what gets measured gets done.
Exactly.
Right? If you have the facts, then you can actually change them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So if you take, we're going to park the policy for one second, but technology as such, how do you see that play a role? We are on the cusp of a new era, 5G, intelligent connectivity, new devices. How do you see that? I mean, there is a risk that the gender gap will all of a sudden start to become wider again because of new technology coming and going in their own direction.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things that worries me about technology and inequality is the technology haves and the technology have-nots. The fact that there still isn't investment in enabling access and ownership to those who don't have, and at the same time, technology is moving so fast. The ones that are still left behind are likely to be left behind even more as the others gallop very fast, and therefore, in the process, we exacerbate the inequality. And that is why there actually has to be a deliberate intervention to invest more and in more significantly in the communities and societies where people are poor and they cannot afford. We need a pro-poor strategy for infrastructure that has to do with technology. I think in many countries, I found, especially when I was in government, and I used to interact a lot with the other governments, that technology is seen as a cute thing, not as a basic necessity. It's not water, it's not sanitation. And I think there's a lot of ways in which many countries have not arrived in the 21st century. And that is why we actually need to talk about this over and over again so that we can highlight the risks of treating this as a nice to have and not a must do, because we are then punishing the poor by leaving them behind even more, because we think, look, you need water, forget about technology.
Yeah, right. But I was one stat that really stuck out. I found that business will be able to get what, 140 billion US dollars, I think it was, if we get everyone connected, while society gets 700 billion.
Yeah.
So it's really 1 to 5. So it is a necessity. It's a necessity for the planet. It's a necessity for you and me as individuals. So why is that so hard? I mean, money normally is a great driver of achieving things. So how would you, if you would give me advice on what should I prioritize? What should we prioritize in pushing a more equal gender society going forward? What are the key things?
Well, I will take from the reports myself because I think the report is a more well thought out intervention and message. And by the way, thank both SEDA and DFID for partnering with GMSA to make this report possible. So I would ask more of partners like CEDA and DFID to come to the fore so that we can do more of this kind of work. And secondly, I just think that giving people a device is a very important first step. And affordability is an important. And the companies, the manufacturers, everyone who has anything to do with making the devices available, give it away, guys. You know, that is such a basic thing. Make the devices affordable or cost neutral, because the benefits in the long term for everybody are huge. So this entry barrier, I think, is an entry barrier that is actually movable, for which there's long-term benefits for everybody.
Do you think governments would step in and subsidize handsets?
Well, I think a combination. I think also the companies must be willing to see this as investment for the future, and governments must be able also to invest. This partnership of these two stakeholders is critical just to give women a starting chance, and not just women, communities a starting chance. I guess we say in many countries, water is a public utility, for instance. People should be able to get it free. I think we need to get closer to that on this issue too, because then we will fast track and leapfrog so many societies. It should be possible now for communities to move from agrarian to fourth industrial revolution. The decision is political decisiveness that is missing for us to actually do that.
And I mean, we met last night, and you told me that you just came from Finland, and you have an absolutely outstanding outlook over the whole globe. You travel extensively, I know that as well. So I guess the recipe for success is very different if you take Pakistan or South Asia versus Latin America versus India or Finland for that matter. But are there some commonalities, some things that you would say, yeah, this is really what we should be focusing on a grand global scale?
I think there's something to be said about education with everybody. Because education enables people to have a need to use and to understand how to use all of the technology that we're needing about requires literacy. So being able to be literate is actually quite important wherever you live. So that is important. But also the one common issue that we need to address, because even in developed and developing countries, there's a difference in the way, I think the study highlights the way men and women use their gadgets. These gender norms, I think we need to address them because they are obviously present everywhere. We need to find a way of making sure that there isn't men's use of technology. I mean, how far can this discrimination go? I mean, it's just like having robots with breasts. I mean, why should a robot be designed like that? Why should we be using internet and the internet must have gender use? So there is something about the norms that we really need to constantly drive to and address.
Yeah, it's like the question we got from over there that the devices needs to work for women, which I thought was pretty interesting. Are the devices not working for women?
I think for me, probably more the content is not as user-friendly for women. I have found most of the time when I talk to women who are first-time users, what are you looking for? There's a lot about health that they're looking for. There's a lot about children that they're looking for, and there's a lot about money. This thing called money, women need, and they need it today. So let's make sure that financial inclusion is made as easy as possible through the usage and ownership of mobile devices.
But what innovation? Isn't innovation part of this as well, to make sure that devices, applications are done by women for women? Today, I know that there's a vast amount of applications, apps are being developed in the US and Europe for the world. And of course, they are just for US and Europe, but they're trying to get them everywhere in the world. So I would think that innovation plays a critical role in making sure that applications, devices are sort of targeted for the people that should use them?
Well, definitely we need to address the issue of context-specific innovation, inclusion in innovation, so that both men and women are innovators. I mean, an innovator from Lesotho will definitely think about the local problems as they innovate. Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice to have a Mosotho leading in artificial intelligence to also solve the problems that people are facing there? Innovation that comes from Silicon Valley is very much Silicon Valley inclined, I would expect.
Exactly.
Not that there's anything wrong from that, but we should be able to be spreading the possibility to have more innovators, gender, regional spread, so that we're able to cover many of these needs that exist in our community. And if the innovators start with wanting to solve the problems of the poorest, it is likely that is because they actually have some experience of being deprived of something, and therefore they want to solve the problem. If you don't have any deprivation, you don't even know the problem exists because you have never experienced it, because exactly. You don't realize that you do have a privilege by being where you are, because usually privilege is not always obvious to those who have it. So you actually need people with lived experience. Women, north, south, that kind of inclusion is actually quite critical.
Yeah, I mean, you don't know what you don't know. That's sort of it, yeah. Okay, so now we are at 2025, and you and I are sitting here again. It's been a quick couple of years. What has changed?
Yeah, I need you to answer that one. What are you going to do? What is your call to action to us here in order to make sure that in 2025 we're in a different place? And in particular, we have accelerated and scaled up the implementation of SDGs. Tell me, what should happen?
It's not part of my script here, so I don't know how to answer that. Now, I think that working with individuals like yourself, working with partnerships with DFID and SIDA is critical in making this happen. I think from a GSMA, from a mobile platform perspective, we're just a massive platform. We're not experts in gender or climate, but we have the ability to push information, push facts. Because facts, I believe, is really important. That you said what you measure gets done. So I hope that in 2025, not only we will have moved into a 5G intelligent connectivity world, but we will see vast amount of more people connected. We'll truly see the benefits of from a financial inclusion perspective, and we'll also be able to bridge the gap slightly. To push this forward, again, we need to have good partnership. This is not one, and I think you said that right, Oliver. There's not one solution to this problem. It is very, very regional or even country-based, or even in a region within a country. So we need to adapt, and we need to continue to push. Innovation for me is critical as well.
And I also hope that by that time, women from Southeast Asia and women from Sub-Saharan Africa will be sitting here talking about their journey and how far they have come. We actually need people who will benefit from this process to be able here to give testimony to the progress that they've made. I think for me, that would really make us know for sure that we have reached the right people. The number of companies that have made pledges, we need to find a way of encouraging them to be very strong in their implementation and afford them opportunity to actually give us feedback on what it is that is working, where are the barriers, and how fast they are growing, so that we can match the commitment and the progress that is being made, the lessons that are being learned, because I'm sure there'll also be new lessons as we implement. How do we adapt also with the changing realities?
Phumzile, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Phumzile.
Thank you both so much for your time, and I think that is a a great segue to the next session where we have the companies who are made these commitments coming on stage to tell us exactly what they are doing and what lessons they've learned. So I'd like to welcome Mccarthy, who's the head of mobile for development, Gsma, who's going to have a panel of people telling us exactly what they've done, and looking forward to hearing about their lessons.
Good morning, everyone. What an amazing opening we've had with the richness of data and then a call to action from the highest levels from MUTS and the UN. But here's the heart of it, because now we're joined by the people who are actually implementing the solutions to close the gap, and they're going to tell us some of the real stories of what that looks like. I'm going to just briefly let you know who's on the stage before we get started, because it's a really impressive panel. Immediately to my left is Doreen Bogdan, Director of the ITU Telecommunications Development Bureau, and as some of you will know, she's taken on that role the 1st of January 2019, which also means she was one of the first women to reach that level at the ITU, so that's something we're celebrating on the side. But of course, she's really here in her capacity as well as the former chair of Equals. Next to her, we have Harmeen Mehta, the Global Chief Information Officer and Head of Digital of Bharti Airtel India, where she's responsible for digitization and engineering across India, South Asia, and 14 countries in Africa. So a great testament to women in STEM. Beside her, we have Irfan Khan, a longtime partner of GSMA and M4D, who's now the Chief Executive Officer of Telenor Pakistan since August 2016, but he's been part of the C-suite in Telenor Pakistan since 2013, so a great leader in telecommunications. Beside him, we have Rachel Samrin, Chief External Affairs Officer and Executive Vice President of Millicom, where she's responsible for Millicom's footprint on corporate communications and corporate responsibility and government relations. And finally, someone I've had the pleasure of working with for many years, Salorm Devoe, the CEO of MTN Ghana since June 2018, but previously was CEO of Digicel Haiti, and then previously back in Ghana before that. So a really excellent panel of senior people who are working on these issues. And I think I'd like to actually start with Doreen to give us that 10,000-foot level. Why is this so important, and how can private sector make these numbers different in the years to come?
Thank you. Thank you, Yasmina, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is great to see a full room early in the morning and filled with both men and women in the audience and on the panel, which is great. Before I answer your question, maybe just to give a big thanks to Claire and to you for all of your efforts, and really for putting this so high on the Mobile World Congress agenda. I have been coming here for the past few years, and I really feel like this time I'm starting to see a big difference. And so maybe coming back to Matt's question about the world in 2025, I think it will look different. I think we're getting there, maybe baby steps, but we are getting there. And I was attending some of the sessions, the one on 5G on Monday, as well as the one on digital transformation in the ministerial. And the 5G panel was moderated by a woman, and all of the panelists were women. And then the digital transformation panel was moderated by a man, but the panelists were all women, women regulators and ministers from Latin America. So I think that's very encouraging. And we need to do more. And I think the intergovernmental organizations, which is where I sit, together with the private sector and all of you in this room, I think we have lots to do. And coming back to what Claire was saying in the beginning, we really do need concerted, targeted actions. And I think that efforts such as Equals can go a long way in helping to make that happen. On the issue of digital financial inclusion, I think just to pick up on what Phumzile was saying before, women need this, and they need this today. So there's really a sense of urgency when we think about digital financial inclusion and all of the talk about digital transformation and a shared digital future and vision for all. We need to close that connectivity gap, and I'm happy that we're making progress, but we need to focus, I would say, a little more on the usage case and really trying to push on the demand side, and that's where digital financial inclusion, I think that's a no-brainer. And so when women perceive the mobile device and access to the internet as a means to become banked, I think that's a win-win. And so I'm very happy to be up here with my private sector colleagues, because I think that they really are doing concrete actions in their countries, and I look forward to listening and learning more from them this morning.
That's great. So thank you for reminding us of that important Equals initiative, which you were a founding member, and how important that's been at the government level to continue to call for these topics. Great to hear that you think MWC is a place where that's happening even more, which is important to have that message more mainstream. And then mobile money, as you rightly point out, is a relevant service. So if we're talking about localizing and making things relevant, you know, what better service than one we have. So let me go from Doreen's macro picture straight to the field, and I'd like to bring in Salorm to talk about the work you've done. You've seen mobile money, you've seen mobile operations, you've seen a few different regions. Tell us what the experience is like now in Ghana and how you're tackling this from MTN's perspective.
Sure, thanks. So Ghana is so let me first start with something personal, which, you know, defined my, I guess, appreciation of this challenge and the effort that we put in. So I think in Ghana there's a popular phrase that says, you educate a man, you educate an individual, you educate a woman, you educate a nation. And that's an important phrase, because it's something that resonates quite well with me. And, you know, sort of looking back at my grandmom and, you know, what she was doing as a trader, trying to mobilize women, starting a bank, the Women's World Bank in Ghana. She was one of the founders. There's just been this long history in my family of trying to bring women together to actually drive economic growth. So what does that mean today from an MTN perspective? If you look at the work we're doing today, just sort of thinking back at the journey we've come through on mobile money, and the early adopters being largely male, and sort of thinking, what's the economic force in Ghana and who's driving that force? A lot of the, I guess, the mass market economic activity happens and is driven by women. So you look at traders, you look at farmers, you look at fishermen who are actually managed by women. Those entire businesses are largely driven by the economic force and power of women. So how do you bring them into this new age of mobile money so they can participate? So we've signed up on a number of projects, and I think as a company we're quite excited about this. Probably not knowing what the outcome or what the impact will be, but going in just based on the commitment and trying to seek out ways to be able to bring women into the fray. One, on the consumer side in adoption. Two, on the commercial side in participating, on the agent side, on the merchant side. And we've done a number of projects. We started in 2016 working with the Gsma on a few projects, the Connected Women Initiative, for example, where today we're actually mobilizing market women to become merchants who can actually receive payments through mobile money. Part of that is to enable other women to feel more comfortable transacting with fellow women on the merchant side, and using that same concept, doing the same thing on the agent side, where we're saying if you can actually increase the number of female agents, you have a much higher likelihood of attracting women to become customers. And when they become customers, they can actually continue to participate in the transactions and continue to drive more money adoption. So we've seen the impact there. I mean, I think it's very early stage. There's some very encouraging data, which will probably be shared in April. But the data shows very clearly that once you're able to bring the women into the digital system, onto mobile money, the implications on transactions, once that trust gap is bridged, is significantly higher than the average person transacting mobile money today. So there is an economic value. There is a contribution to the business as well that we have seen. That not being the primary rationale for going into this but being an outcome that's very desirable as well from a business
Really
perspective.
interesting. Thank you for starting with that sort of personal note. But I note that how interesting it is that you sort of said the gender gap is the symptom. What we really need to look at is the core. And if we have more people who are women, more, whether that's agents or merchants or probably team members as well, then we will just naturally kind of close that gap. That's really interesting. Do you think your statement as a leader has been kind of important in your team members seeing this as a priority? How has the company kind of rallied around this to make sure it wasn't just a side project?
So I'm quite new. I actually joined June last year, like you said. So I'd say my participation so far has been a little peripheral. The good news is that I'm very aligned to the initiatives that already started. So in the discussions that we had recently, I think the team were quite surprised that I was actually quite interested and already aligned. In 2012, we actually started when I was with Millicom, started an initiative with Market Women. So we targeted about 15 markets in Ghana. It was a women initiative where we specifically dedicated funds to go out there and educate women to make them agents with the same idea. This was something we did internally. So I think sharing some of these stories with the team, was very encouraging. I think they were very excited about the alignment to some of these initiatives.
Perfect, and good to see we have MTN and Tigo still sitting together.
Absolutely.
Good, so let's pull in a different region, a region that unfortunately has been kind of singled out by the data, saying that we really do have some challenges in the South Asian context, and I'd like to get Harmeen's view. Tell us a little bit about the Airtel experience and kind of making this commitment, the rationale for this commitment, but then tell us about the reality of the kind of in-country examples you're seeing to close the gap.
See, I think India has always been a country of contradictions and contrasts. We have more than 60% of the wealth of the entire country is concentrated in less than 1% of the individuals, and that's a full reality when you walk through the streets as well. You'll see some people, they might be living on the side streets, but you'll see some of the most expensive houses that those streets line, and I think. As a business, the challenge is you have to cater for both ends of society with equal gusto and be seen as a brand that you can, serve the people who actually bring in the money, but at the same time, if you're not including the rest of the country, as a large mobile operator, you're not doing justice to that. I think one of the most creative things that I have seen, and I've been back in India for the last 5 years since I've been with Airtel, but was about a little over 3 years ago, the government took an initiative to launch payments banks. And it was a full financial inclusion initiative. And it basically said full banking services except you can't lend. And they put a limit of, about 100,000 that, that's the amount of money. So it was literally meant for financial inclusion. So it was not meant for, the cities and the rich. It's really for the rural population. And I think one of the biggest things that we did, and it has been an eye-opening experience for me, was when we were setting up the bank a little over 2 years ago. I was intrinsically involved in going into a lot of these villages and doing focus groups and identifying what are we going to do and who are we targeting and why are we targeting, and so on and so forth. And we spoke to a lot of groups of men and women. And you'll see, again, coming back to my theory of contradictions, when you see the numbers, you'll see it's a country of 1.3 billion people, and you'll see over almost 1 billion people have bank accounts. That's a very good number on paper. But when you look at the reality, more than half of this population is either underbanked or still unbanked. And that is the reality we live in. And the reason for that, and when we were going into these villages, is a lot of these people, they work on a daily wage, whether it's a man or a woman. And in fact, the contradiction of society is it's the middle class where the women tend to be more taking care of the families and homemakers, but in the lower class, there is no such luxury. Almost, every woman has some vocation of the other because she needs to do her part to bring in the bread at home. So each one of them worked, and as they worked, they would all be in different kind of jobs where it's more like a daily wage worker. So if she had to ever go to the bank, or even if her husband had to go to the bank, that means that night there's no money coming into the household. because the banks are about a few kilometers away. You go there, and then, you know, because these are small banks, there are queues and so on and so forth. So it almost takes a day out. The second thing that came out very interestingly out of the women was they felt they were not as savvy with financial services. So every time they went to the bank, they were made to feel a little less about themselves. And it was a derogatory experience for them. So even if she mustered enough courage to go to the bank once, now the second time, she's even more reluctant than she was the first time. And then she again has a bad experience. And the third time, she's literally, unless her life depends on it, she's not going to the bank. And there's never a fourth time. And this was, you know, almost every strata of, you know, every state that we spoke to, this was kind of a common theme. And that's what we pivoted the entire financial inclusion and payments bank strategy on. To give you a different stat, India has over all the banks put together, national, private, etc., have about 150,000 bank branches and about 225,000 ATMs throughout the country. And what we did was we took all of the, and we were, you know, one of the largest telecom operator. We had about 1.5 million retail outlets out there. And we took the major retail outlets where we had very deep relationships and where we were a prime source of income for the retailers as well. And we made each and every one of them a banking correspondent. So the day we launched the payments bank, the first day we doubled the financial and the banking presence in the country, because we launched with 250,000 retailers. And we ran a lot of campaigns about, actually, some of our initial advertising campaigns, we did not have a single man. It was all targeted, and it's not that we did it for the women, but it was to bring out that fact that if she's the one who's feeling derogatory, but she's also expected to put bread on the table at the end of the day, how to make her feel more empowered and saying, you know, okay, I've got a bank that I literally have to walk less than 100 feet or maximum of 100 meters, because that's where our retail outlets are. And I can go and do, and it's a person, it's either my grocery store guy or somewhere where I'm used to going every day. So even if I don't know something, it's a person I have an everyday relationship. I'm not going to feel intimidated, and I'm not going to feel lesser about myself. And I think that entire dynamic, actually that was the year, and then it was coincidentally around that time that Claire came over and we were talking about this. And that's what, I mean, that's the honest truth. That's what really made us very serious about this entire movement and said, we're going to sign up and see what more we can do and drive.
Knowing Claire Sipp Thorpe, it wasn't a coincidence that she
I
arrived
know,
at that moment.
And somehow every time she comes over, you know, the commitment goes up. I mean,
I don't know how that works, but that's great. So coming back again to the theme of mobile money, but also the densification and just making it easy for people, men or women, but in this case, making it easy and accessible for women to feel that they've got that agent right there, that they feel welcome and not anything else.
Exactly.
So,
and I think it's also because if you look, a lot of these women, more than 1/3 of the women who have smartphones, or even actually not smartphones, any kind of a phone, have a hand-me-down in India. So it's either the man has now gone to his second or third phone, and that's what she gets, or it is another member of the family. And out of that as well, if I see in the rural side of India, which is more than 2/3 of India, only 18% of women actually are on the internet. So even if you look from a business point of view, the opportunity is to get, you know, the remaining 82% and target them as well. And I think, but the education and, you know, somewhere I think there has to be a pull and a push. We are seeing more push at the moment, especially in my country. I think we need a little bit more pull as well, because somewhere women have to find a way of breaking down this barrier. So, you know, organizations can also help them get there. And that little hesitance, we've tried many things and we keep trying, and but I think there are some barriers that are still to be crossed.
good. So we'll get some more views from Doreen, I think, on that point, which is interesting. But one of the things that you really touched on at the opening line was you used the word gusto, and having as much gusto in dealing with the low-income clients, men and women, the last mile clients, and the new AI hub that's sprouted up in your city. And I think that is the challenge we face now in the private sector, is trying to straddle this very fast-moving new tech, whether it's AI, big data, IoT, 5G, the very present-day reality we have on 2G and 3G, and then making sure we're leaving no one behind. And all that's probably happening in every one of your workdays. And having an equal amount of gusto for all of those activities is no small task. And getting your investors to recognize that diversity of needs is probably no small task. So let's continue with these private sector stories, because I think they're absolutely fascinating. I'm going to zoom back out to the global view and bring in Rachel Sumrin, who works across Latin America and Africa and probably has very different experiences. So tell us a little bit about what it's like to implement these projects and drive action at a country level.
Well, I think maybe, like you said, we are both perhaps better known by the brand name of Tigo. So Millicom is the corporate name for those of you who are out in our countries. As I said, looking at it both Latin America and Africa, and as we saw from the data that Oliver was presenting, we're looking at different problem sets. However, for us, it's not so much about closing the gender gap, although those are the commitments that we've given. It's more the fact, as you said, there is a digital economy we're all talking about here in Congress, and that digital economy needs to be for everyone, right? So it's not about just the gap, it's about actually connecting everyone. And while we heard that sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia are areas where a lot of focus is still needed, not everyone isn't connected in Latin America either. So we see it more as like, how do we indeed make sure that everyone has that access? I mean, if you look at it, Latin America, the Caribbean, 49% of women are still not connected to the internet. And then if we look at our countries on a global scale, wherever we are, socioeconomic development is good business for us. Right? Our purpose is really to be a partner with governments in driving socioeconomic development, because it is a no-brainer that 50% of the population, the women in this case, or a bit more than 50%, are not only our future customers, they're also a future talent pool. We want our countries to do well economically, because we will do better economically. And the starting point for all of that is to make sure that every woman, wherever they are, and whether it's in Africa or in Latin America, are part of driving that economy. And that comes back to the points we already heard here from Sir Lawrence. It comes back by starting with the education. Or as Matt said, you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't know the value of having that mobile phone or the smartphone, if you don't understand the usage of it, you don't know what you're missing out on. But we can't build economies, we can't build better businesses if we don't have all the active participants contributing to that, right? We saw the numbers. It is a no-brainer. So for us, it's something that we look at and very much localize it. What is it that's needed per country? And I think that is one of the big takeaways for me when we talk about what are the action points, what are the opportunities here. We have to have local solutions to local problems. We cannot provide all of those solutions. We can have ideas, innovative ideas, but we need to work with governments. We need to work with civil society organizations. We need to say, what is it that the women specifically in those areas where we are in need? Colombia is a great example. As you know, we have committed all of our operations to the Connected Women Initiative with Claire's team, because we think that every country deserves it and all our customers deserve it. But in Colombia, there is no big gender gap in the usage. But once you start breaking down into regions, we realize, well, actually it looks very different from region to region. And why is that, right? So you need to really drill down to the local level in order to get that inclusion for all. And what is it that drives them? So Honduras, a country where perhaps you think, well, it's just about the internet connectivity. No, it's about the fact that you have a lot of women producing handicrafts, but they don't really sell it outside of the community because they don't know how. So you don't only teach them about the smartphone, you also teach them about how to set up the mobile money wallet, how to actually create a social media profile, how to start selling their products, how to then be able to save that money and use it on their kids. Then their kids go to school. Then they start contributing to the community. So it's all a very, very golden circle, we call it, more than anything. But you got to know what is it in the local little communities. So it is a global view, but it's the local solutions for the local problems that are really going to drive it.
Yeah, that really resonates. I think this great number that they put on the screen around the digital economy, right, was 170 billion and 0.7% GDP growth over 5 years.
Yeah.
700 billion. What did I say? 700 million. Oh, 170. All right, let's try that again. 700 billion, to be very clear, is massive, right? But this GDP growth as well, just the fact that while doing this, while thinking about the digital economy, while thinking about those local entrepreneurs, means you will actually drive toward a GDP growth for your country. I think that's such a powerful story, and certainly one that team members can get excited about.
Which brings you more and better customers, right? So
and
it
talent
is
pool and this kind of
Exactly.
relationship, which is amazing. Okay, Irfan, you've been a great partner of ours on many projects, but the Connected Women Commitment in particular. And I'd love to hear really some of those tangible stories from Pakistan and the environment you work in, and how you think about making sure that both men and women come into the digital economy in your country.
So our commitment also, and the main premise behind it is our own vision, which is the global vision for Telenor, which is to empower societies. And we see a very clear connection of making sure that everyone is connected in the markets we operate in, and everyone is actually ready to reap the benefits of digital and financial inclusion. So when we look at the sort of Pakistan as a country, there's a huge gap, as also highlighted in the report as well, especially when it comes to the rural Pakistan. And then it's all the reasons which were mentioned here resonates very well with our own focus groups, our own insights as well. So we took it as a challenge that how can we sort of, as a company, contribute towards, sort of the overall economic growth of the country. If you give you some stats, women in Pakistan only contribute 18 to 20% of GDP, whereas they are about 51% of the population, right? So there's a huge lag which needs to address. And we firmly believe that going forward, mobile phone is a tool for development, which will, create opportunities which never existed before for women as well. Keeping that in mind, we come up with a lot of initiatives, right from creating the awareness. There were a lot of social myths as well, especially linked to education at the school level, that internet may not be good. There could be some social taboos associated with it. So we run a very comprehensive on-ground program in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities and villages just to address that perception. That how can you actually use this as a tool to seek knowledge? We focus on girls' schools. We focus on with partners as well. We did a lot of gamification to create interest. We actually took those competitions to the national TV as well, where we had a reach of over 600,000 kids across 1,600 schools in a given year. This program has been running for 4 or 5 years now. So what does it do is it just created a lot more awareness and excitement among the youth, because you have to start from there as well. We've also seen the government also come up with their initiatives, because again, Pakistan is a country with over 100 million young people. So you need to really focus on the early adapters, the youth as such. And we have a former ICT minister actually sitting in the room. She, under her leadership, Anusha Rahman, started ICT for Girls program, just to enable girls to teach coding. Just to get benefit. And today, it's over 140,000 girls who've been, trained. So with those steps, you are sort of working on a funnel, which is a large funnel, and you see people dropping out for various reasons: lack of awareness, of affordability, lack of use cases. And then we look at some specific use cases. Again, if we zoom into a country, 50% or more people are linked with agriculture, 22% contribution of GDP coming from agriculture. And we see females are very active participant of agri-economy. And again, how can we really leverage, because they may have access to phones, either they own it or they have still access through the family members, but they don't know what to do with it, how they can improve their lives, how can they work it sort of better towards the betterment of the families itself, whether it's nutrition of the kids or a livestock. So we come up with specific programs, intervention, which is around agriculture. It's information-based services, which is targeted towards female as such. And now we have, approaching overall, close to 6 million farmers. A large portion of that actually is female farmers. We're tracking it, and we are sort of enriching that through partnerships, and that's really helping. So, you need to really look at, how you can give value to them. The purpose becomes, after awareness, obviously, the next step for conversion is that how and why they should use it. So I think, and then we were also sort of leveraging on a fact that in Pakistan, the national registration requirements came in 4 or 5 years ago. So in order to own SIM, you need to be verified with the national database, and we have a database of over 100 million people again there. Leveraging that, how can you reach out and also sort of, especially in the deep rural, employ some of those female folks as your distributors, as your retailers. It gives them another reason actually to improve their livelihood as such. So by such interventions, I think we are now building an ecosystem which I firmly believe will take us forward in that direction.
I'm kind of struck by this journey that you're articulating, right? We're almost taking it for granted that this phone is so amazing, but you're saying, no, actually you have to start from the very beginning to say what value can this bring to a young girl, a young boy, a community who may have some social norms against the digital era, and then go from there, whether it's bringing people into the job economy through digital jobs and then bringing them in through more relevant services like agri. So it's a really multifaceted approach from that full journey of inclusion. You don't just start by...
And the latest building block which we're working on is financial inclusion, because we don't see it separately. I mean, I think the digital and financial inclusion goes hand in hand. And as you know, I mean, we also own the second largest global mobile money brand, EasyPesa. Again, a lot of females are there, but I mean, there's a huge disparity when you look at our segmentation. It's primarily men. And when you look at, again, the insights on ground, there were a lot of barriers for female to use that service. Because primarily, I mean, when we started, is a OTC or over-the-counter service. And now we're coming up with, more innovation that how can we use it towards more mobile wallet so that, I mean, it's a lot more convenient for female folks as well to use it in the privacy of their own home. They don't have to go to the retailer to pay or send money. And then link it with that is also some of the lending services based on credit scoring, which are, again, targeted towards female farmers. So we feel that, I mean, because of the bottom of the pyramid, rural economy, you need to really address it where it makes the most impact. And then you need to do it. So basically what we have done is created a lot of building blocks now. The next step for us is actually to bring it all together into one package to give that value, which will be then so important for everyone. Yeah.
I'd like to come back up to the kind of government or international lens from Doreen. I think you've heard from the private sector a lot of just different ways they're tackling the issue, whether it's innovations in mobile money or agriculture or merchant payments, whether it's looking at the local economy and looking for those local solutions, or whether it's bringing more women into the workforce to design these new innovations. There's really a kind of range of solutions they're targeting. Where do you see kind of government's role and the international community's role to kind of support these efforts?
So I think obviously governments have a big role to play on the policy side, and we are encouraged when we look at national broadband policies and plans to see specific references to gender and to connecting more women. So I think that's encouraging. But when we talk again about the digital economy, I think it's not just the ICT ministry that has a role to play. I think what's needed is a sort of whole of government approach when we talk about digital transformation. I think governments from the very top, from the head of state or the prime minister level, they need to put this as a priority and keep in mind that closing the digital gender gap is hugely important if you really want to have a digital economy and digital society for all. So that leadership is key at the top, but coming back to what Harmeen was saying, that sort of pull and push, I think we always need to keep in mind the needs on the ground. So the point that Rachel was making about local, governments need to be sensitive to the fact that it's not just one solution for the whole population, that they need to be attentive to what really the needs are on the ground and really work with local communities. With Pumzili before, we were talking about, train the trainers programs. And if we can't get out to the masses, we can try to train people that can then go out to the masses. And Rwanda has done that well with their with the Digital Opportunities Trust, with the Digital Ambassadors Program, where they have trained people and then they've gone out to the rural communities and done further training. And so that kind of model, I think, is a good one that should be further explored and pushed. And we have different initiatives that we're doing together with UN Women, with the African Union, with different development agency partners on coding and teaching girls in more remote areas coding skills, and then having them demonstrate to their peers, even demonstrate to the UN Secretary General, as they did a couple weeks ago at the African Union Summit. But showing those real cases and then spreading the messages, I think also goes a long way when we talk about the impact. and the need for others to get engaged in this.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's this kind of global framework that needs to be adopted or welcomed, but a need to understand that it's always going to be different. These markets are wildly different and will have their own adjustments around that. But I really like the message that we heard earlier from Fumzila as well, that this is not just a cute thing. We can't start saying that this is just an extra bonus. This can help a woman run her business. This can help a family get educated. This can help the health solutions, the mobile money. This is not just cute. And so helping that cross-government approach to really having a mandate that says digital inclusion is essential, and it is essential for everyone. And we will not leave anyone behind, I think, is a very powerful role that people like you will be playing.
No, thank you. And just maybe one quick point. I mean, I think you have to think of the device not just as something that you use for consumption, but coming back to the point about the devices and having sort of female-friendly devices. We need to work in particular with the younger audiences to establish the next generation of innovators or creators, right? We need to make sure that young women and girls are actually out there creating, not just consuming, but creating apps and devices. And I always say I look forward to the day that someone invents a female-friendly wireless headset device, because it will be very female-friendly. But really to push the importance of women and girls actually creating things that will be beneficial for them.
Absolutely. I think everyone will benefit from having that diversity, more diversity in innovation. So I'm going to let the private sector panelists close us out, and I'd like to hear from each of you, and we'll start with Salarm and work our way towards Harmeen. And just give us maybe one kind of challenge that you'd really like the private sector to take up, and any lesson that you've already learned about that challenge. So I think if you can give some of your wisdom to the other private sector who might be ready to take that challenge on, and then perhaps any call to action that you might have.
Sure. I think one of the biggest challenges, which may be quite general, is just if you look at the adoption curves and who the early adopters are, it's typically men. And therefore you have, right from the adoption curve, you have a challenge where there's already a gap. So I guess the key thing, a part of this is social, part of this is access, part of this is just the stereotype of technology being more male-oriented. There are a number of reasons why this is the case. And I guess one of the first steps is really to try to encourage and target our activities to be a lot more balanced when we're seeking out some of these new technologies. And I think the idea that we've spoken about, making the device more friendly towards women, perhaps is a starting point for influencing the adoption curve and the profile of the early adopters. And if we can actually influence that, then that's beginning to change the way we think about technology adoption. On the social side, there are lots of norms, and I think, Efa mentioned that as well, where in Ghana as well, it's exactly the same thing. There are all these things, taboos, there are all these rules that, 2 generations up would make a lot of sense, but 2 generations down, I just can't understand half of them. But they still exist and they still dictate behavior. So being able to educate people around some of these social norms that influence behavior would be sort of one of the big things we'll all have to do to try to overcome some of these things.
That's great. I love the idea about redefining the adoption curve, right? It doesn't just have to be young techie males who get that first new gadget, and thinking about how to making that more inclusive from the start. Rachel?
Well, I think one point that I would like to reach out to people like Doreen on to help all of us do better. It sometimes feels like we're having two parallel conversations. On the one hand, we all, we've given loads of examples of how we drive, digital inclusion, financial inclusion for women, how we want to do that. The governments do want us to do that. The international institutions want us to do that. And at the same time, it's like there's a separate conversation with the same governments where we are looking at how can we actually build this digital infrastructure, right? There is no digital economy, as our CEO always says, without digital highways. Digital highways are not up in the cloud. We're talking actual core infrastructure. It's still the towers that we have to put out there in remote areas. Still enormous amounts of investments that we need to put in as companies to be able to build those digital highways that in turn then will allow us to put out these products, to work with the women, to get the adoption. And sometimes it feels like we're having two separate or two different conversations, and the governments are not linking those two conversations, right? In order for us to do everything that we've all said here today, the basic starting point is that we can build the digital highways, that we can afford to build the digital highways, that we have the right incentives to do so, that we have the right taxation environment, that we have, and Doreen knows where I'm going with all this, but I think unless we actually make sure that governments in our countries and down to that local level solution also see that as one and the same conversation, we can have the best of ideas and we will keep on chipping away and working away, but then we'll never get or drive that full digital and financial inclusion for everyone. So I think that is a huge challenge for all of us, and I don't think any of us have the solution. We do need partners like Doreen, like the executive director, to help us overcome that challenge, because I think that that comes back to the core. Without that digital infrastructure, without the highways, we won't be able to really have everyone benefit from all the other initiatives.
Absolutely. It has to be part and parcel. It can't be two different things. Good. Irfan.
No, I want to build on what Rachel was just saying. We need to see telecoms not just as one sector, but it's a sector of sectors. I mean, it's a door opener for, whether it's health, education, commerce, agriculture. So this has to be seen as part of the national agenda and how we can drive it. And then this, the gender issue and female involvement is integral to this. And we need to see it as one common approach where we sort of reduce all the barriers. We need to see this tool as sort of the tool for productivity enhancement and changing people's life and creating that positive impact. Also, I mean, going forward, I mean, this will become, because the future work is changing. And we need to really train our next generation and right from the policymakers to the actual executing arms of the society to think around this, that how can we really leverage this opportunity? And we need to move from that thinking where, the telcos as well been traditionally seen as the someone who's delivering, minutes and megabytes. Now we need to really focus on delivering those moments which can change people's lives. And then, I mean, it's whether men or women, it's the same. But we need, obviously, lot specific interventions to make that whole ecosystem a lot more female friendly, whether it's a privacy issues, whether it's information security issues. There has to be, we need a concerted efforts, actually, all of us together, to make it sure that this is a safer place for females as well, and we can address those barriers.
And I'm encouraged seeing, 4 CXOs up here all kind of feeling comfortable with their role as not just a telecom kind of tracking our numbers each month, and did we have this many subscribers or that many subscribers, and did we have this much revenue or that much revenue, but actually what did we do for our communities? And I do believe that telecoms have evolved, and you see that more and more. So I think sector of sector is a powerful way to say that, and I do hope governments will increasingly see us as a partner in this building out the economy rather than just building a tower. Harmeen, give us your thoughts as we close out this session.
So I think, one of the things that I'm looking to drive is a little different. So, I mean, I gave you the stats earlier that if only 18% of the women are there on the internet, and they're working, looking to see what we can do to, it's a hand-me-down phone that they're waiting for, and so on and so forth. I think if I were to see generally if their confidence level is, by average low, and they're not as literate or digitally savvy to, even if they had a smartphone, what they would do with it. One of the pieces is there something we can do to break down all these barriers? And there's a very big experiment that we're just about to embark on, is saying, what if we take a lot of our core telco services as well as our financial inclusion piece and just enable it on voice in a local language. So you don't need to know how to operate the smartphone. You don't need to know how to open the app. That's because one thing I can tell you women know very well is how to talk. We excel at it. So just use the power that every single woman, 500 million of them that are in my country, that's one thing that we can relate to. So that's one massive experiment we're about to embark on, and see that how that changes the penetration of internet amongst the gender, and also takes it very deep into rural areas, because we've tried a lot of the digital education, etc. it is not only very capital intensive, but it has very, very limited impact, because unless it goes viral, it's not going to make a difference. So actually, taking this so seriously, I bought over a company who's actually now doing this for me, and and it's something that over the next couple of quarters we're going to really start rolling out. It's a great innovation that's coming, and anyways, it helps with a lot of that. And another piece that we actually, I'm going to steal my team's thunder, and they might kill me when I go back, but is on Women's Day we're intending to launch a very, a very specific kind of a safety app, which we had done for. It's a very interesting story. There was a small incident that happened in one of, in one of the cities where there were some young girls who worked through the night shift, and and it just got us a little concerned that we don't want any of this happening. And we were discussing, as part of our Women Empowered panel within the organization, saying we should definitely, besides tightening security and all that, we should do something much more intuitive. And a lot of the young girls, the developers in my shop, the young engineers, they came back and said that they'll use their own time and develop kind of a very detailed safety app. And I think a safety app that anybody else develops out there, and a safety app that a telco can develop, I mean, nothing can be as deeper. Even if your data is off, I'll be able to tell you within 100, 150 meters where that person is. You can narrow down the zone. You can triangulate through sites. I mean, there is, in cases of crisis, there is like immense things we can do, whether or not, even if you had the phone on. So how we can really use the power of all of that, plus with so much deep learning and AI that we use in our shops, I mean, for us to be able to use the power of the community to actually bring out the aspect of women's safety as well. So a lot of these young engineers have come together and developed this entire application, and then the Federation of Industry and Commerce in my country, so FICCI actually took this on, and they're now wanting to launch it, pan-India, even outside our own ecosystem. And we really feel that it's one small way, but the entire approach and the campaign around this is word of mouth from women to women, and actually man to women as well, saying, if you're a woman and you want this, here it is. But if you have a loved woman in your life, be it your daughter or mother or a wife or a sister, here is something for her as well. And appealing differently to both genders, but something that allows, and it's the way it works, again, it's going to be not only voice enabled, but so simple that you don't really need to be a PhD in mobile development in order to be able to use them. And I think some of these, I think these are just a few ideas, but we've got to really think out of the box and radically, and not just, if you're saying 500 million women are going to change and become digitally savvy tomorrow night, I mean, I think we're smoking something.
I didn't expect that to be the final word of the panel. Well, I think we've heard some really amazing views. I think, first of all, I'm just thrilled at the level and caliber of talent on the stage talking about this issue. I think that shows its importance from this panel as well from Zilla's leadership and Matt's. I think has been very powerful, and of course starting the conversation with data. But just to reiterate some of these themes, I think we've heard from Doreen that it has to be a cross-government view. This is not just an ICT view, but it has to be a kind of full cross-government dialogue. I think Salar challenged us to try and redefine the adoption curve. I love that, and thinking about how we, from the moment the handset's created, to making it a more inclusive device and more people around the table designing it, men, women, different people of different backgrounds. I think Rachel reminded us that this is a digital economy. There are digital infrastructure that needs to be built, and government and private sector have to be in partnership for that. We can't just keep being at battle or have a short-term mindset about that. Irfan really reminded us of some of the opportunities within Pakistan, the very tangible opportunities, but he referenced this kind of sector of sectors, which I think is beautiful language, that not only what we do for telecom customers, but how we enable society more broadly, healthcare, education, etc. And then Harmeen challenged us to just meet people where they are today. And if they have a basic handset and a hand-me-down, and they have only voice services, let's do some innovations there as well, because at least we make sure they're included today. And that's a great call for action as we go from here towards the celebration of Women's Day on March 8th. So please join me in thanking this really great panel and their thoughts today.
Thank you very much. That's to the panelists and everybody who's speaking. It's been great and great to have everybody here. I think for me, what I took out of it was, this is not an easy job. This is a big challenge. It's not easy. The issues are different in different countries, and I thought it was really important message in the last panel about how we really need to localize our work, and we really need to focus on what the needs are of the women in this market and the different markets. And from my perspective, we are absolutely delighted that the mobile industry is driving action on this issue. They are really leading the charge. I'm going to say again, over 16 million women reached since making commitments. The number of women who are being reached, and this very targeted, very real, impactful action by our members is absolutely amazing to see. I would like to call on other stakeholders to also join this charge, and I think that came out in that panel. I thought Matt's made a very good comment about, this is a huge revenue opportunity for industry. For every $1, he said, for every $1 of revenue the industry is getting, there's $5 for the economy. So we need to break out of the silos, as was mentioned. We need other people to take equally bold stands with targets. I really believe in targets. We need to set ourselves targets. We need to deliver on them. And I really call on everybody in this room to join us, to join the mobile industry in trying to address this. I don't want to come back here in 2025 and saying that the gender gap is still 10%. We need to make a difference, and I really hope that you will join us in that. And we are around. Talk to us. We want to partner with you. We want to work with you, and with Equals and with Gsma. So please come and join us. So thank you very much for everybody for coming this morning. And,